Thank you so much, choir, for that impromptu request. I think that after the message today, you will understand why that was requested. I want to begin a series beginning today called I'll Be Home for Christmas. There's been many singers and musicians and movies that have used that same little title from that song. The way I understand is that the song originated during the 1940s, and it was originally written from the perspective of a World War II soldier who was stranded overseas during Christmas. It's kind of a sad song, but we can relate to it because we have so many memories from Christmas. We have these longings and desires for the things, the traditions that we do at Christmas. I think that the words in the song have something to do with mistletoe and presents and family and being with loved ones. And I've been thinking about this all the way back into, September, October, and I wanted to relate this idea of being home for Christmas to also being at home and at rest and at peace with God. If there's anything important around the Christmas season, it is understanding the true importance of what Christmas is about, and it is also understanding where our hearts truly need to be. Our hearts truly need to be at home and at peace with God. I know there are people that are struggling with many things. Some people truly do struggle with materialism. Some people truly do study with wallowing in self-pity. Some people struggle with depression. Some people struggle with hopelessness. Some people struggle with loneliness. And some of those things that I've mentioned here are sometimes the results of our own actions, and sometimes they are beyond our control. It is not really in the scope of your control to be lonely at Christmas. Some have lost their spouse and now they are widowed or they are a widower and they are spending the holidays, and it's a very sad time. There are some people who are depressed, and that is the result of a clinical issue, a medical issue, a real issue, and that is beyond their control. But I want you to know whether you are suffering from something as a result of your own actions or suffering from the result of the circumstances around you, that there is a common remedy, and that is drawing close to God, depending on Him, trusting in Him. If you will, take your Bibles and open them to the book of Micah. The book of Micah, and I'm going to give you a chance to find it. That may be a challenge this morning. It's on page 959, if that helps. You may have to, and unashamedly, look at the table of contents in the front of your Bible. You'll find that Micah is near the end of the Old Testament. It is one of the last few books written in the Old Testament. It is one of the last words of God before the coming of Jesus to this earth. Micah was a prophet who prophesied during around 700 BC, probably around the reign of Hezekiah, maybe a little after Hezekiah. And as you know, it is a prophetic book. And prophecy can be a bit tricky. When you're reading the text in these books like Hosea and Amos and Micah and Jonah, and by the way, Micah is right after Jonah if you found it. It's right before Nahum. You'll find that when you're reading the text that many times it will be talking about something that is presently happening, and then it will fast forward to something that will happen. We find that in our text today. We find Micah prophesying about the present condition, and then there is a look to the future, and it is a look of hope. As you know, these prophets were sometimes despised by their audience. I am so thankful to be worshiping with you today. I feel your love, your appreciation towards me, your friendship towards me, your warm fellowship towards me. And sometimes I am moved by how difficult it would have been to be Micah, how difficult it would have been to be Jonah. And we could mention all of the prophets. You have heard in our study in Matthew at how Jesus is rejected just like the prophets were rejected. He was sometimes preaching to people that hated His guts, but He still preached. He still conveyed the message and communicated the message that God gave Him. Unashamedly, boldly, and courageously. Not worrying about what it may cost Him politically. Not worrying about what people would think, because He knew if God had said it, that it was His obligation to pass along the message however people would receive it. And here Micah is in the time of national crisis. Follow along with me as we begin at chapter 5. Micah chapter 5, beginning at verse 1. Micah chapter 5, beginning at verse 1. Now gather thyself in troops, O daughter of troops. He hath laid siege against us. They shall smite the judge of Israel with a rod upon the cheek. But thou, Bethlehem Ephratah, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from of old, from everlasting. Therefore will He give them up, until the time that she which travaileth hath brought forth. Then the remnant of His brethren shall return unto the children of Israel, and He shall stand and feed in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall abide, for now shall He be great unto the ends of the earth. As I just mentioned, here we are dropped into the middle of Micah's ministry in chapter 5. And he comes to this point to where the country is in a national crisis. Micah is a prophet here to Jerusalem, and the people of Jerusalem are in the capital city of Judah. And there would be the temple, and there would be the king. And it was an arrangement where there was a high priest, there were sacrifices occurring, a king was on his throne, yet all is not well in Judah. It is a very sad situation. I am moved this morning. I am emotional this morning in recalling how distant they are from God. They are not home for Christmas. And I know that some of you may be struggling with some spiritual problems. You have drifted away. The people of Jerusalem have drifted away from their God. It comes here in the first verse of the text. The Hebrew root here, it literally means they have been slashing themselves. They are slashing themselves because they are in mourning. They are to a point of resorting to things outside of the scope of true worship. And that's where I want to start with you today, is to see in verse 1, there is a present dilemma of the people of Israel. Notice this problem. It is their current situation. They are spiritually hopeless. They are spiritually depressed. They are spiritually depraved people. They are blinded by their own backslidenness. They do not even know that they have drifted away from God. In fact, what they have done is resorted to everything under the sun except true worship. You know, if you read the book of Micah and you read the other prophetic books, what is not emphasized is sacrifice. You say, well, no, it's the religious rituals that we need to get back to. It is all of these things that are important. No, that's not what God told the prophets. What He told the prophets is, what matters is a true heart. What matters is a heart that is humble. You'll find in the book of Micah in chapter 6 just the essential aspect of what it means to be close to God. Notice here in our text in verse 1, he says, "Now gather thyself in troops, O daughter of troops. He hath laid siege against us." They are being threatened by an invasion. And here they are at a time of crisis when they need to be worshiping God and when they need to be turning to Him, but they are slashing themselves. This was a custom from the Baal worshipers. This was a custom that they had picked up and observed from those heathen that lived among them in the people of Israel. And so they are so hopeless, they think, well, let's try this, maybe that will work. Let's try that, maybe that will work. And they are literally cutting themselves. How sad it is for God's people to be turning away from God when they need to be turning to God. And they are resorting to strategies and approaches that the false worshipers would resort to. And so they are blinded by their false idols and their worship. But notice in the second part of verse 1, they also are led by a powerless king. Notice what it says there. This is in the present. In fact, look at the beginning of verse 1. He says, now. He explains to us that we're not looking into the future. We are looking at your present condition. The present condition is one of crisis. It's one of emergency. It is one where we need to be dropping down to our knees and calling upon the Lord, but they are resorting to false worship. And it won't be that they can turn to a mighty king to lead them out of this problem. They are led by a powerless king. Notice what's happening to their king at the end of verse 1. The invaders, those who are laying siege to them, are going to smite, that means strike, their king on the cheek. It was interesting that if you look at Zedekiah, the king, which it could have been a prophecy about him, he was blinded because he was tortured at the hands of the Babylonians. And so they are led by a current king who is unable to lead them out of this crisis. So where do we turn? We look over here and we want to turn to maybe some strategies that the false worshipers have tried, and we resort to that. And then we look at the political solution and we look to a king, but he is powerless, he is impotent, he is incapable, he is unable to rescue his people either. Well, notice there is a transition to hope in verse 2. And he points just about 5 miles down the road. Did I tell you that in verse 1 and for the ministry of Micah, we are in Jerusalem, right? Bethlehem just is a little place that sits on the outskirts of Jerusalem. I almost said Little Rock. It's a little place like Lawson that sits on the outskirts of Little Rock. You know, if you go around Little Rock, you'll find that a lot of people know where Lawson Road is. A lot of people have never been out here. It is kind of insignificant in comparison to Benton, or to Cabot, or to Conway, or to some of these other mighty towns. Just little old place here, out in the country, on the outskirts of Jerusalem called Bethlehem. Bethlehem has a history though. And he says, but you, Bethlehem Ephratah. Matthew leaves that out when he tells you that the prophecy of Micah is fulfilled in that Jesus would be born in Bethlehem. And he talks about how it is an insignificant place. In fact, it says little in our King James here, but it's not the typical word that is translated little. It's the word that's typically, it's a different word, and it's typically the definition or the meaning of it is insignificant. It is minor. It is a minor place. It is an insignificant place. And so that's what Micah means here, is that it is a place of little reputation. But here is Bethlehem, and Bethlehem would be the place where David would come from. And you're going to see some references here to David in just a minute. And he says, though thou be insignificant or little among the thousands, and that word there is the clans. The clans are made up of many families, and there would be many clans that would make up the tribe. This is the land of Judah that we're in. You know, back in Genesis chapter 49, it was prophesied about the tribe of Judah that there would be a ruler that would come forth from the tribe of Judah. And here within the tribe of Judah, there is a little place, an insignificant place, and there is some clans there that live in Judah, and it is just some families that live there. That word Ephrata, you say, what does that mean? That is debated, and it's kind of unknown. I'll tell you something interesting, though, that I came across, is that it could be a reference to a descendant of Caleb who was from the tribe of Ephraim. And he was married to an Ephraimite. And that family and that lineage possibly migrated down to Judah. And so that's what the name means. But what we do know is this, is that David's daddy, named Jesse, was called an Ephratite. He was identified closely with this. And so when Micah says Bethlehem Ephrata, the reader would say, well, I know what that means. I remember the great King David, who the covenant of David was given to. His dad was identified with this clan. He was identified with this family group here. And so the reader would automatically been thinking about the glory days of the King of David, and how the Davidic covenant was promised that for everlasting the Davidic covenant would assure that a descendant of David would sit on the throne of Israel for eternity. Dear friend, that is a prophecy about Jesus. And so we're starting to put the pieces together, aren't we? An insignificant place compared to a very significant place, Jerusalem, where there was currently a king who is incapable. There would be, look at this, it is, out of you will come forth a ruler in Israel. He's talking about a king would be born in Bethlehem. But we have a king in Jerusalem. We have a king, but he is incapable. Jerusalem is the mighty city, but Bethlehem is the little city. And the king that sits on that throne is incapable, but here we have a message of hope, because one day there's going to be a king that's going to come out of the tribe of Judah from a little insignificant place called Bethlehem. And he will be a ruler in Israel. And we're given something about him, is that the origins of this ruler can be traced many, many generations. It says of old, from everlasting. The same word was used in the book of Amos. Listen very carefully. And it was referring to David. They said Ancient of Days is how it is translated in the book of Amos. But the context there was talking about how it was in the Ancient of Days, back in the days of David. And so another reference here to David, isn't it? And then he says on the end of that, from everlasting. And so it is connected to David, but it is also connected to eternity. We're going to see in just a minute, but this ruler is coming from an insignificant place, but he is very powerful. He is one whose origins can be traced back many generations, even to eternity. Let me tell you what that includes. That includes the beginning of humanity and before that. You say, why did you mention that? Because I'm going to tell you that's what all of our problems are. It happened at Adam. It happened in the garden. And so this ruler's origins go all the way back, trace the line of humanity and before humanity. The third thing is this. Notice there in verse 3, you'll see that this present dilemma is going to continue. The crisis will continue until the new ruler is born. Notice what it says. It's very simple, isn't it? Therefore will he give them up until the time that she which travaileth hath brought forth. So this present time, it is that God is going to judge this people that He is prophesying to. He is going to continue His judgment. They are drifted away from God. They have broken their side of the covenant. And so God will give them up. Will just turn them over to their own desires. If you desire to worship Baal, then you can have Baal. If you want to look after the model of other countries as what your king should look like, then I'll give you up and you can have it. He will give them up until there would be a woman who would give birth. And then history is going to change. So their present dilemma will continue. But then there will be a game changer. Don't you love that when there's a game changer? You're in a situation, you're in a crisis, and you're hopeless, and you don't know what to do next. But then, out of nowhere, something happens and it changes the game. Everything that you thought was going one direction, now because of something that occurred, it goes the other direction. Let me tell you, when Jesus was born, it was a game changer. Notice there in verse 3, until the time that she has brought forth, and then things are going to change. And then it says, and this is where Micah is going to take you on a journey into the future. He's talking about their present condition is going to stay the same. When Jesus is born, it's going to be a game changer. Let me tell you, He's going to die on the cross. He's going to give His life. And there's going to be a visual fulfillment of the promise of salvation to the whole world through Jesus. Game changer. And then He's going to go into the future. I think this is really projecting beyond where we are today. But it could be happening right now. There is going to be a regathering of Israel. There's going to be a regathering of His people. Did you know that as the God, I think that there is a little bit of a now, but also in the future. Here is what's happening now. The gospel message of Jesus is going out, and people are being returned from the exile of sin. They are being gathered. As people are being saved, God is gathering His people, continuously gathering His people. But there is, in the literal sense, there's also going to be a gathering of Israel. I think both of those are happening now. And when He comes back, He is going to take His people home. After He takes us out of this world, there's going to be a tribulation. There's going to be a time of Jacob's trouble. And that remnant of Israel is going to be sealed and saved. 144,000. You'll find out in the book of Revelation. There's going to be a remnant, a fulfillment of the promise that Israel is His people and there are blessings in store for Israel. I think that's what He's doing here. He's looking into the future. But there's another aspect of it. Look what kind of ruler this ruler will be. He won't be like whoever it is sitting on the throne, incapable and powerless. In verse 4, you'll find this new ruler who is going to be a game changer. When He sits on the throne, and I think that He is on the throne now, and He is saving His people. And He's going to come back, but He's not done conquering yet. And He is ultimately going to sit on the throne of the world, and He will judge this world with righteousness and truth. Notice here in verse 4, you'll see that this new ruler will be powerful and effective. It says, and He shall stand and feed in the strength of the Lord. His strength and empowerment is going to come from God. It won't be one who is not a spiritually minded ruler, one who is not in tune with the things of God. It will be someone who is in tune with God. Notice there he also, in verse 4, it says, He will feed His people. He will be able to provide for His people what no other king can provide. And then also notice that there is the sustaining of His people. It says, in the majesty and the name of the Lord is God. And that speaks of His authority and power there. And He will be able to sustain His people, it says in the text, and they shall abide. They won't be scattered. They won't be running around. They won't be without direction. They shall abide. This ruler is going to be a different kind of ruler. And then lastly, you'll see this. For now shall He be great unto the ends of the earth. The little king of Judah or the little king of Israel, whatever, if you're talking about the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom, those kings were incapable and powerless and were being struck on the face, slapped around like they were nothing. They were incapable. This king that is going to be born in Bethlehem is going to be one who his influence and the scope of His power will reach the ends of the earth. He will rule the world. I want to leave you with this. We started with talking about, will you be home for Christmas? Will you be home for Christmas? All of those things that I talked about, hopelessness, depression, self-pity, materialism, those are all inwardly focused. And I'm telling you that the remedy for all of those things is to have a focus on God. Instead of looking inward and dwelling on these things, look outward and look to God and trust Him today. You say, this is interesting, but why? Why did God give Micah these words? What was the point? Well, because God wanted you to know something about the Messiah so that you could identify Him. Dear friend, as you study the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament, you'll see that Jesus fulfilled all of the prophecies about Him. And here is another to where we can look. Was Jesus born in Bethlehem? He was. Is He able to feed and sustain His people? He is. Is He come empowered by God? He was. He is. He fits all of this description that was given. And it's so you can know who Jesus is. And you can know what God has done through His Son. Why? So you can believe on Him. Dear friend, if you have not believed on Jesus today, I want to invite you to trust in Him. Trust at who He is. He is the Son of God, empowered. He will feed you. He will sustain you. He is worthy of worship. He is worthy of praise. Praise God for what He's done through His Son. I want to leave you with one last thing. Did you notice the contrast? I tried all throughout the message today to show you that contrast. With Jesus, without Jesus. Without Jesus, powerless, incapable, impotent, unable. With Jesus, power and authority, salvation. There's no salvation in this little king who is slapped around by foreign invaders. But there's salvation in this one who is going to stand and feed. What does it say? In the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall abide for now shall he be great unto the ends of the earth. What are you looking to? Are you looking to Jesus? As we stand, as we have a song of invitation this morning,